You're not living in a country anymore. You're living in a controlled demolition. 153,000 layoffs last month. $113 trillion in credit card debt. 60% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck. The dollar is losing global reserve status, and fast. While you're working 2 jobs to split rent with a roommate, Congress just sent another $14 billion overseas. Meanwhile, suicides are at an all-time high. Youth depression has doubled, and 1 in 4 adults in this country is skipping meals to afford housing. You're being squeezed, watched, silenced. And the worst part? It's all by design. This is not a recession. This is not mismanagement. America is being set up to collapse on purpose, and millions still don't see it. The U.S. food system is one broken shipment away from chaos. You ever wonder how close we are to empty shelves? No, not in a doomsday prepper fantasy. I'm talking real-world supply chain fragility that nobody seems to be fixing. Most Americans think if you swipe your card at the grocery store, food just magically appears. But the terrifying truth is that America's food system has been silently rewired into a just-in-time, debt-fueled Frankenstein that's hanging on by a thread. In fact, 80% of all grocery items in the U.S. travel over 1,500 miles before they hit the shelf. One missed delivery, one cyber attack, one major storm, and entire regions will be staring at bare aisles and rationed goods. You think that's dramatic? Ask Texas residents during the 2021 deep freeze when dairy, meat, and vegetables vanished in 48 hours. Or the East Coast during the Colonial Pipeline hack when gas dried up in days. Here's the scary part. Food supply is now directly tied to digital logistics, meaning your dinner depends on Wi-Fi and warehouse robots. And those warehouses, they're not packed with excess inventory like in the old days. Thanks to lean corporate models, we've got razor-thin margins and no backup. The average grocery store has just 3 days of food in stock at any given time. Worse, over 90% of America's fresh produce is imported, mostly from Mexico, Chile, and Peru. And guess what? All of that crosses borders on diesel trucks and boats running on borrowed time and diesel priced by global instability. What happens when Mexico decides to hoard its onions or California can't pump water to its lettuce fields? Food inflation hits double digits, like it did in 2022 when the USDA reported a 14.9% spike in grocery costs, the highest since the 1970s. Farmers are selling land. Fertilizer is now a geopolitical weapon. And now climate change is cooking crops from Kansas to Kerala. Meanwhile, companies like Tyson and Cargill are laying off staff and closing plants. The U.S. used to have over 1,500 meat processing plants. Now, 4 companies control 85% of the beef supply. One cyber attack or labor strike shuts down meat for millions. So here's the truth. They don't need to shut down all of America. Just tweak one domino in the food chain, and this entire over-leveraged, underprepared system collapses into famine, chaos, and government ration lines. And you won't see it coming. Most Americans will only realize when their kid's baby formula is sold out, and there's no truck on the way. Cities are time bombs of unpayable debt and dying infrastructure. Do you really know what's under your feet when you walk through a city like Chicago, Philadelphia, or Los Angeles? I'll tell you what's down there. Pipes from the 1800s, sewers so old rats are the only ones who know the full layout, and cracked concrete foundations with more debt than Detroit in 2013. What the media won't tell you is that over 2,000 U.S. cities are functionally bankrupt, but still pretending to be solvent by playing accounting tricks with pension funds and federal grants. In cities like San Francisco, unfunded pension liabilities are exploding, now surpassing $8 billion, with a B. And what happens when those retirements can't be paid? Teachers, firefighters, and police walk off the job. The potholes don't get fixed. Trash stops being picked up. Crime goes up. And let me be clear, this isn't theoretical. In 2023 alone, cities like Birmingham, Alabama, and Chester, Pennsylvania, filed for bankruptcy due to ballooning health benefit obligations. Now, zoom out. The American Society of Civil Engineers gave U.S. infrastructure a C, and that's a generous grade. We've got over 46,000 structurally deficient bridges, many of which carry millions of vehicles per day. Leaking water mains lose 6 billion gallons of treated water every day, and nearly 10 million homes still have lead pipes. That's poison, flowing straight into your tap. And what's being done? Cities are so deep in debt they're issuing municipal junk bonds just to make payroll. Meanwhile, crime is becoming unmanageable. Retail theft in urban areas is up 81% in the last 2 years, and 2024 is projected to set new records. Big retailers are closing shop. Target, Walgreens, Whole Foods, they're all leaving. Not because of profits, but because of safety and policy chaos. What do you think happens when cities start to collapse economically and physically at the same time? Civil unrest, riots, gutted police departments. And it won't be dramatic like the movies. It'll be slow motion. Rotting buildings, dark streets, looted stores, the death of civic life. Millions of Americans still believe cities are the beating heart of innovation and opportunity. But behind the skyscrapers and Instagram skylines, these places are debt-ridden husks on the edge of implosion. And when they fall, there's no bailout big enough to save them. The education system is churning out debt slaves, not thinkers. The American school system isn't just failing, it's setting kids up to be lifelong financial prisoners. Start with this. Student loan debt in the U.S. has hit $1.77 trillion. That's more than credit cards, more than auto loans. And the kicker? Over 60% of borrowers now regret taking out the loans. Why? Because after 4 years and 6 figures in debt, half of graduates are working jobs that don't even require a degree. The system sold them a fantasy: take on massive loans, get a degree, and climb the economic ladder. But here's the dirty secret. Colleges are businesses, and their customers are 18-year-olds who don't know compound interest from a toaster. They don't teach financial literacy. They don't teach critical thinking. They teach obedience and conformity, wrapped in DEI statements and inflated admin salaries. The average university president now makes $700,000 a year, while students take out $50,000 just to afford food and rent. And what about K-12? We spend more per student than almost any other developed nation, over $15,000 annually, yet rank 18th in reading and 36th in math. Why? Because the curriculum is watered down, the standards are political, and the incentives are backwards. Teachers are quitting in record numbers. 300,000 left the profession in just 2023 alone. And the replacements are often undertrained, underpaid, and overwhelmed. But here's where it gets insidious. Instead of reforming education, the government doubles down on debt relief and forgiveness, which doesn't fix the system, it feeds it. Colleges keep raising tuition, loan servicers get their interest, and the Department of Education keeps pumping out subsidized loans like candy. It's a Ponzi scheme that feeds itself off the backs of broke graduates who will spend decades trying to dig out. And while the rich send their kids to private schools or overseas, the average American is stuck in a cycle of debt, underemployment, and economic hopelessness, all dressed up as higher learning. You think collapse is a moment? No. Collapse is a generation of Americans who can't afford a home, a family, or a future, because they were tricked into buying a broken promise with borrowed money. The US dollar is being quietly replaced, and nobody's sounding the alarm. While most Americans are worried about grocery prices or gas costs, something far more dangerous is happening silently in the background: the slow-motion dethroning of the US dollar. For nearly a century, the dollar has been the world's reserve currency, the linchpin of global trade, the reason why America could run massive deficits and still call the shots. But that era is ending, and Washington's pretending like it's not happening. Let's talk numbers. In 2001, nearly 73% of global reserves were held in US dollars. Today, it's dropped below 59%, and the decline is accelerating. Countries like China, Russia, Brazil, even Saudi Arabia, once loyal to the petrodollar system, are now ditching dollar settlements and forming their own trade alliances using local currencies and even gold. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are openly talking about a new reserve currency backed by commodities, and they're inviting 20-plus countries to join. This isn't a conspiracy. It's already reshaping trade. In March 2023, China and Brazil settled a massive energy deal in yuan, not dollars. Just this year, India paid for Russian oil in rupees and UAE dirhams, bypassing SWIFT entirely. And here's the kicker. The US weaponized the dollar by freezing $300 billion of Russia's reserves during the Ukraine war. That was the red line. Now every non-Western country is asking, what if they do that to us? So they're cashing out, buying gold, building digital currencies, and dumping treasuries. In fact, foreign holdings of US debt have dropped by over $800 billion since 2021. That's why the Fed is stuck. If they cut rates, the dollar collapses faster. If they raise them, they implode the domestic economy. And what's even worse, the average American has no idea that if the dollar loses reserve status, imports will double in price overnight. Oil, food, electronics, gone. Interest rates, through the roof. Your mortgage, your credit card, your student loan, all unaffordable. And the federal government? They'll be forced to print even more money just to stay afloat, triggering hyperinflation that wipes out savings and pensions. So while TikTok trends distract us and Congress argues about nonsense, the foundations of the American financial empire are being quietly removed. This is how empires end. Not with a bang, but with a whisper in a different currency. America's energy grid is one heat wave away from total failure. The American power grid is breaking down faster than we can patch it. You think inflation's your biggest concern? Try going 3 days in August without AC in Phoenix or Houston, because that's exactly what's coming. Our grid wasn't built for the modern world. It's a patchwork system of outdated transformers, fragile substations, and aging power lines, 70% of which are over 25 years old. And now, we're plugging in Teslas, crypto miners, smart homes, and massive data centers like we're still in the 1990s. Spoiler alert, it's not going to hold. The Department of Energy admitted in 2023 that over 60% of high-voltage transmission lines need to be replaced within the next 10 years. Meanwhile, wildfires, heat waves, and cyber attacks are increasing yearly. California, the fifth largest economy in the world, issued rolling blackout warnings in 2022 and 2023 because demand during heat waves overwhelmed the system. Texas, even worse. After Winter Storm Uri in 2021, over 700 people died, millions lost power, and damages exceeded $195 billion. But here's what's truly insane. We're adding pressure to the system without fixing the foundation. EV mandates, green energy transitions, and AI server farms are doubling energy needs. But new infrastructure projects take 7 to 10 years to complete, thanks to red tape and lawsuits. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation, NERC, recently warned that 2/3 of the U.S. could face blackouts in the summer of 2025 if we don't ramp up transmission capacity. But there's no ramp-up happening, just press releases. And if you think solar panels and wind turbines will save us, guess what? They require weather cooperation and massive lithium batteries, which we're importing from China while pretending we're energy independent. If the grid fails, banking systems go offline, gas pumps stop working, food spoils, hospitals lose power, and water stops flowing. It's not just an inconvenience, it's collapse. And yet, no presidential candidate, no major bill, no mainstream voice is fixing the root problem. Our grid is running on duct tape and luck. And when it goes, it'll take every fragile piece of American life with it. Commerce, healthcare, communication, and control. One heat wave, one hack, one storm, that's all it takes. But don't worry, there's always TikTok to keep you distracted, if your phone still charges. The middle class is quietly being liquidated by design. Because make no mistake, this isn't a market cycle. This isn't capitalism doing its thing. This is a multi-decade war on your wealth, your labor, and your independence. Since 1971, when the U.S. abandoned the gold standard, the game has changed. Real wages have flatlined while productivity has soared. That's not natural. That's a system that rewards capital, not labor. And while politicians keep blaming the rich or the poor, the real target has always been you, the working American. Consider this. In the 1980s, a single income could buy a house, a car, and put 2 kids through school. Today, 2 full-time incomes can barely afford rent in a second-tier city. Median home prices have jumped 500% since 1990, while wages have only doubled. And credit card debt just hit a record $113 trillion, the highest ever. But here's where it gets ugly. This squeeze isn't accidental, it's policy. The Fed keeps inflating asset prices to stimulate the economy, which makes housing, stocks, and basic goods unaffordable to anyone not already wealthy. Meanwhile, taxes on wage earners stay high, while billionaires borrow against assets tax-free. The top 1% now own more wealth than the entire middle 60% combined. And here's another trap: healthcare. The average American family now pays over $22,000 a year for health insurance. For what? Endless bills, surprise charges, and a broken system that bankrupts 500,000 people a year. And as your wages get eaten by inflation, premiums, and taxes, your purchasing power disappears. You work more for less, with nothing left to save. This is liquidation. But here's the most sinister part. They want you distracted, divided, and dependent. So they flood your feed with culture wars, race wars, gender debates, anything to keep you fighting your neighbor while the ruling class loots the vault. The American middle class used to be the envy of the world. Now it's an endangered species, debt-ridden, asset-poor, and one layoff away from disaster. And nobody's coming to save you. Because in this new economy, the future isn't upward mobility. It's permanent rentership, government dependency, and digital compliance. This isn't collapse. It's controlled demolition. And you're not supposed to notice until it's too late. Most Americans still believe they live in a free country. They assume that as long as they're not breaking the law, they have nothing to worry about. But let me tell you something that'll keep you up tonight. We're already living inside a surveillance state. And it's not just watching you, it's profiling, predicting, and preparing to control you. See, it didn't start with the NSA or the Patriot Act. It started the moment Americans traded privacy for convenience. Smart TVs, Alexa speakers, wearable fitness trackers, Ring doorbells, all feeding real-time data to corporations who then sell it to the government under a third-party doctrine loophole that sidesteps the Fourth Amendment. You don't own your data, you don't control it. You can't opt out, and that's just the start. The FBI now conducts over 200,000 warrantless backdoor searches a year, and that's only what they admit to. Local law enforcement is using facial recognition databases with millions of images, many scraped from social media without consent. DHS fusion centers now operate across the country, blending federal, state, and corporate data streams to build threat assessments on citizens, including journalists, whistleblowers, and activists. But here's where it gets horrifying. They're not just tracking you, they're automating the punishment. Social media posts flagged for misinformation, shadow bans, account freezes, even FBI visits. Visa or MasterCard decides your gun store purchase was suspicious? Transaction declined. And what happens when this digital dragnet gets fused with central bank digital currencies, CBDCs? They'll be able to shut off your money with a keystroke. Bought too much gas this week? Sorry, your carbon credits are used up. Donated to the wrong cause? Account frozen for security review. The Biden administration has already begun piloting CBDC infrastructure under the FedNow system, and it's no coincidence that Visa, MasterCard, and JP Morgan are simultaneously testing programmable digital wallets. The infrastructure for China-style financial censorship is being built right now, and most Americans have no idea. You see, collapse doesn't just look like breadlines and riots. Sometimes it looks like silence. A nation of people too afraid to speak, too tracked to move freely, and too broke to fight back. We're not fighting to preserve liberty, we're trying to remember what it felt like. Because if we don't wake up soon, this won't be the land of the free, it'll be the database of the monitored. While Americans drown in medical debt and live paycheck to paycheck, the U.S. just approved a $886 billion military budget for 2024, the largest in history. That's nearly $2.5 billion per day pumped into a machine that hasn't won a war since World War II. But here's the kicker. The defense contractors don't want victory. They want continuity. Endless conflicts, proxy wars, arms deals, and nation building that never builds anything but their own stock portfolios. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Dynamics, they're not companies, they're state-subsidized war factories. In fact, over 55% of the Pentagon's budget goes to private contractors. That's not defense, that's corporate welfare. And while they cash in, you pay the price. Because every dollar we send to prop up NATO, Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, or wherever the next flashpoint is a dollar not spent fixing bridges, building homes, or feeding kids. And now the money printer is on fire. The U.S. national debt just passed $35 trillion and we're adding $1 trillion every 100 days. Why? Because military spending isn't capped. It's automatic. It's sacred. Democrats and Republicans might fight over food stamps, but they'll never touch the sacred cow of defense. And here's where it gets darker. The war machine doesn't just bleed our wallets, it bleeds our sons and daughters. 22 veterans commit suicide every day. Over 70% of new recruits come from low-income zip codes, offered no other way out. They fight not for freedom, but for a student loan waiver and a shot at health insurance. And when they come home, the VA backlog is over 1.2 million claims and counting. So let's be brutally honest. The military isn't defending freedom anymore. It's protecting empire. And empires, by nature, eat themselves. Rome fell when its legions were scattered across the known world, draining the treasury while the home front crumbled. Sound familiar? The U.S. has 750 bases in over 80 countries, and we can't even secure our own border. Congress has authorized $200 billion for Ukraine alone since 2022, more than Russia's entire annual military budget. And there's no accountability. Billions are lost in transit, weapons are showing up on black markets, and the American people are told to shut up and wave a flag. This is how collapse happens. Not because we were invaded, but because we spent our last pennies defending someone else's borders while our own cities rot and our people starve. And the worst part? We've normalized it. The Pentagon is the only federal agency that has never passed an audit. You'd be jailed for that. They get a raise. The border isn't just broken. It's a strategic pressure valve for systemic collapse. This one's going to sting, because what's happening at the southern border isn't a humanitarian crisis. It's a controlled detonation. You've been told the border's overwhelmed or under-resourced, but let me hit you with the raw truth. What's happening is not failure, it's design. In just the last 12 months, over 3.2 million illegal border crossings have been recorded, and that's just what's documented. That's more than the population of 17 U.S. states. Cities like New York, Chicago, and Denver are now so overwhelmed with migrants that they've started cutting school budgets, slashing emergency services, and converting hotels and rec centers into shelters. And still, buses keep coming, flights keep arriving, and the federal government just keeps saying, there is no crisis. But there is, and it's boiling beneath the surface. See, mass migration is being used as a pressure valve, not to fix a labor shortage or protect asylum seekers, but to destabilize American infrastructure, overwhelm civic institutions, and break the back of local governance. Schools are now teaching in 5 languages. Emergency rooms are gridlocked. Police departments are redirecting patrols to migrant response teams. And this isn't about left or right. It's about control. Because if you can overload a system, you can justify federalizing it. When sanctuary cities run out of cash, guess who steps in? Not the mayor, not the state, the feds, FEMA, DHS, and eventually, centralized digital ID systems tied to benefits and movement. But here's the real kicker. While average Americans are losing jobs, paying $2,400 a month for rent, and rationing insulin, billions in federal contracts are going to NGOs and private security firms profiting off the chaos. Border nonprofits are now billion-dollar operations. And behind the scenes, globalist think tanks are openly publishing reports calling for the U.S. to absorb 100 million new migrants by 2050 to sustain the economy. So no, this isn't random. It's the playbook. Use crisis to erode sovereignty. Make the collapse seem like compassion. And when the backlash comes, label it extremist, censor it online, and criminalize dissent. Meanwhile, Americans get priced out of housing, taxed into oblivion, and replaced in labor markets by people who work for $7 an hour and never unionize. This is not immigration, it's economic weaponization. And when the backlash finally breaks through, it'll be too late. Because by then, the borders won't matter. Because the country they defined will already be gone. America is slowly turning its own people into enemies of the state. Not with tanks, not with bullets, but with quiet, calculated dehumanization. The kind you don't even realize until you look around and ask, why does this place feel like it hates me? Look at what's happening. Veterans, teachers, farmers, truckers, builders of this country are now treated like liabilities. If you question the government, you're labeled a threat. If you speak up, you're extreme. If you push back, you're investigated. And it's not just words anymore. The DOJ, the FBI, and the IRS have quietly expanded their surveillance powers under the guise of domestic extremism. What used to be reserved for terrorists is now being aimed at soccer moms, gun owners, and blue-collar workers who simply refuse to go along with the program. But here's where it gets truly dystopian. Your suffering is now suspicious. You lost your job? Must be laziness. You can't afford rent? You're irresponsible. You want to homeschool your kids, grow your own food, or live off-grid? You're on a watch list. In modern America, self-sufficiency is subversion. And faith? That's now a red flag too. Churches are being monitored. Traditional Catholics and evangelical Christians have been flagged in FBI memos as potential radicalization risks. The institutions that once held this country together, family, faith, community, are now portrayed as threats to democracy. And the media? They're not just complicit. They're the megaphone, turning neighbor against neighbor, inventing villains out of ordinary people. And when the state tells the masses that you are the danger, they believe it. They want you censored, fired, even arrested. And so, what do we become? A nation of strangers, distrustful, isolated, scared to speak, scared to ask questions. And that's exactly how a free people are broken, through engineered silence. We are witnessing a psychological siege of the American spirit. This isn't collapse in the economic sense. It's spiritual warfare, sanctioned from the top down. You're not just being taxed and tracked, you're being conditioned to hate yourself, your history, and each other. And when that kind of sickness spreads far enough, you don't need martial law. You don't need gulags. People will police themselves. Families will destroy each other. Neighbors will turn each other in. All while the architects of this nightmare sit back and say, look, we saved democracy. But they didn't. They buried it. And millions still don't see it. Because they've been trained not to look, not to ask, not to feel. This isn't just the collapse of a nation. It's the collapse of its soul. This isn't incompetence. It's not just inflation or bad luck or the cycle. This is strategic decay. A $35 trillion debt trap, weaponized migration, engineered poverty, collapsing cities, a broken grid, a dying dollar, and a system that's quietly training you to obey while it all burns down. You are not crazy. You are watching a nation eat itself alive while its leaders fly private and tell you it's fine. But the alarms are screaming. 50% of Americans now rely on government support to survive. 70% of U.S. bridges are structurally outdated. And 9 out of $10 in existence were printed in just the last 4 years. This is collapse in real time. You won't get a warning. You won't get a second chance. So while they tell you to trust the plan, you better start making one of your own. Because if you wait for permission to fight back, you'll already be buried under the rubble.